A millionaire had a terrible blind date until a black waitress came up to him and quietly said something he never expected to hear that night. The table was perfect, white candles, crystal glasses, and a menu without prices. It was the kind of place where wealthy people go to appear even wealthier. Dominic Martinez stared at the linen tablecloth, not really noticing it. He was 42 years old, owned 3 companies, wore a navy blue suit worth more than what most people make in a month, and yet he was completely, deeply alone. The woman sitting across from him was Melissa Castillo. She wore a red dress, matching lipstick, and had a smile that reached her eyes but not beyond them. They had met only 19 minutes ago, but it felt much longer. "You said you own real estate," she asked, not even looking at him. Her phone was on the table, and she kept scrolling as she spoke, treating the conversation like a secondary task. "Yes," Dominic replied. "Among other things." She finally looked up. "My friend said you're a millionaire." "What kind?" He blinked. "What do you mean, what kind?" "What kind of millionaire?" she said, placing her phone aside without locking it. "There are people with real money, and there are people whose success is just debt in disguise. You understand, right?" He did. Something tightened in his chest, not anger, not yet, but a cold realization that the evening was already ruined. Still, he stayed. He couldn't quite explain why. Maybe it was the smell of rosemary drifting from the kitchen. Maybe it was the soft music barely heard beneath the chatter. Or maybe it was the waitress. She had come to their table just 2 minutes after they sat down. Tall, with skin as dark as polished wood, her hair pinned back loosely with a pencil, she smiled at Dominic in a way he couldn't quite understand. It wasn't the usual customer service smile, it was the smile of someone who knew something. She introduced herself as Gloria and slipped away silently. "Are you even listening to me?" Melissa tapped her fingers on the white tablecloth. "Yes." Dominic placed the napkin on his lap. "You asked about real estate. I asked about net worth." She smiled again, too perfect, like a dentist's smile. "This restaurant doesn't seem like a place a man with real money would pick for a first impression." The dining room could hold around 60 people and was nearly full. No one around them was paying any attention, but Dominic felt as if everyone were listening. "I chose this restaurant," he said slowly, "because the food is good." "Oh," she opened the menu. "How charming." The tone was that of someone who thinks it's not charming at all. Dominic looked at his glass of water. He did the math. He could call a cab and be home in 18 minutes. He could say he had an urgent call. He could simply get up. That was when Gloria returned. She brought sparkling water neither of them had ordered, placed the glasses with silent precision, and turned to leave. But just as she passed Dominic, she slowed her pace just a little. Enough for him to hear in a very low voice, barely moving her lips. "If I were you, I'd stay." And she disappeared among the tables. Dominic stared at the spot where she had been standing. His heart skipped a beat. Why would a waitress he'd never seen before in his life say something like that? Melissa was talking about an ex who owned a sailboat. Dominic listened without really hearing. He wasn't leaving. Not yet. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There's much more coming. The order arrived before either of them had really decided anything. Gloria placed a wicker basket of artisanal bread on the table, and Melissa looked at it as if it were a personal offense. "I don't eat carbs," she said, pushing the basket aside with her fingertips. Gloria didn't respond. She just smiled with the calmness of someone who's heard worse and moved on. Dominic picked up a piece of bread, not because he was hungry, but because he wanted to make it clear to himself at least, that he wasn't going to follow the script Melissa was writing. So she said, crossing her legs, "Are you divorced?" "I've never been married." She raised an eyebrow. "Why?" It was too direct a question for a first conversation. The kind people ask when they aren't really curious. When they want to build a case. I didn't find the right person, Dominic said. Or you didn't look hard enough. He looked at her. Was that a diagnosis or an accusation? An observation. She picked up her phone again. I have a friend who's a therapist. She'd say that successful men over 40 who've never married have unresolved attachment issues. Would she say that on a blind date, too? She wouldn't go on blind dates. The smile firmed. But Dominic felt as if everyone was listening. I chose this restaurant, he said slowly, because the food is good. Oh. She opened the menu. How charming. Her tone made it clear she didn't find it charming at all. Dominic looked at his glass of water and started calculating. He could call a cab and be home in 18 minutes. He could pretend he had an urgent call. He could simply get up and leave. That was when Gloria came back. She brought sparkling water neither of them had ordered, set the glasses down with quiet precision, and turned to go. But as she passed Dominic, she slowed just enough for him to hear her whisper, barely moving her lips. If I were you, I'd stay. Then she disappeared between the tables. Dominic stared at the spot where she had been. His heart skipped. Why would a waitress he had never seen before say something like that? Melissa was talking about an ex who owned a sailboat. Dominic listened without really hearing. He wasn't leaving. Not yet. The food arrived before they had truly decided on anything. Gloria placed a basket of artisanal bread on the table, and Melissa looked at it as if it offended her. I don't eat carbs, she said, pushing it away with her fingertips. Gloria didn't react. She only smiled calmly, like someone who had heard worse and moved on. Dominic picked up a piece of bread, not because he was hungry, but because he wanted to show, at least to himself, that he wasn't going to follow the script Melissa seemed to be writing. So, she said, crossing her legs, are you divorced? I've never been married. She raised an eyebrow. Why? It was too direct for a first meeting, the kind of question people ask not out of curiosity, but to form a judgment. I didn't find the right person, Dominic said. Or you didn't look hard enough. He looked at her. Was that a diagnosis or an accusation? An observation. She picked up her phone again. I have a friend who's a therapist. She says successful men over 40 who've never married usually have unresolved attachment issues. Would she say that on a blind date too? She wouldn't go on blind dates. Her smile tightened. Neither would I, usually. There was something in that sentence that was meant to sound like a compliment. It didn't. Dominic glanced across the room. Gloria was serving another table, her back turned to him. Still, he kept watching, trying to understand what she had seen, what she knew that he didn't. If I were you, I'd stay. 5 words, said quietly, almost like a secret. Why would a waitress say that to a stranger? You're ignoring me. Melissa's voice pulled him back. I was thinking about business. It was a lie, but the kind she would understand. And she did, or at least pretended to. Her expression softened slightly, and she shifted in her chair, as if business was the only language she respected. My father had a construction company, she said. It went bankrupt when I was 15. That's why I don't get involved with men who don't have proven financial stability. I see. But what he understood wasn't what she meant. What he understood was that Melissa Castillo had grown up with fear, and that fear had turned into a standard. And standards born from fear don't choose people, they choose guarantees. He had once been a man of guarantees. Now, he was a man starting over. No one knew that. The navy blue suit didn't reveal it. Neither did the restaurant, nor the business address still listed under his name. 18 months ago, Dominic Martinez had lost almost everything. Not all at once, worse than that, little by little. A partner. A betrayal. A contract collapsing like a wall that had been weakening for years, ignored until it finally gave way. He had come out of it with enough to begin again. But, enough, was very different from what he once had. And starting over at 42, alone, felt heavier at night. The friend who arranged the date thought he needed to get out more. Remember, there was life beyond numbers and balance sheets. Dominic had agreed, mostly because he was tired of arguing. The main course arrived. Melissa examined her plate like she was reviewing a deal. "I asked for it without butter," she said to Gloria. "It is without butter." "Yes." Gloria's voice remained calm. "The shine is from olive oil." Melissa let out a quiet, controlled sigh, the kind that says more than words. Gloria didn't leave right away. She stayed a moment longer than necessary.